بيوم كان منتظر خطيبته، وبعد كده جاله الخبر إن السفينة غرقت وخطيبته ماتت وحزن كتير.
This hymn has a story about the winding of someone named Jovan Iskander. This person is Irish, and after he proposes to his fiancée, she must come from a trip and board the ship. He brought me joy when he was waiting for his fiancée, and then the news broke that the ship sank and his fiancée had died, and a lot of sadness.
حزن كتير وبكى كتير وتألم كتير، وساب أيرلندا وراح كندا، وملقيش صديق ولا حد يهتم بيه غير يسوع. عشان كده رنم الترنيمة دي سنة 1855، ولا زالت الترنيمة ترنم حتى الآن بالعربي وبالإنجليش في كل دول العالم. يا ريت كل واحد فينا يختار يسوع صديق ألزق من الأخ في كل المواقف، في الحزن، في الفرح، في الألم، في المرض، في كل شيء. آمين.
There was a lot of sadness, a lot of crying, and a lot of pain. Ireland went to Canada and found no friend and no one to care about him except Jesus. That's why he sang from this restoration in the year 1855, and that's why the restoration is sung to this day in Arabic and English in all the countries of the world. I wish every one of us would choose Jesus as a friend closer to a brother in all processions. In sadness, in joy, in pain, in sickness, in everything, amen.
آمين.
435, what a friend we have in Jesus.
يا ترى أي صديق مثل فدنا الحبيب يحمل الأسى معنا وجزى الهم المذيب. يا لإنعام التسامح من لدن رب النجاة، بر أمين ورقيق القلب يرسي لبلايا المؤمنين. فإذا كنا غلبنا من جر حمل الهموم فلنصلي ليسوع نجد النصر العظيم. هل صديق كيسوع قادر بر أمين ورقيق القلب يرسي لبلايا المؤمنين. فإذا كنا غلبنا من جرى حمل الهموم فلنصلي ليسوع بالنصر العظيم آمين.
Thank you, Mike Bell. Away from his country, and yet not his God. And it is a blessing to have him here worshiping with us on an every Sunday basis. Couple of things to mention and updates to give. But before we do that, Dave's trivia. All right. Lot's wife, question number one, Lot's wife turned to what after wanting to return to Sodom? I'm going to go to the back there. Adler beat you, Mr. Jeremiah. Adler? Dust. Oh, the mighty have fallen. Josh, salt is correct. Come on up here, buddy, and I'll give you your dum-dum. And then number two, when John says, I am the voice, you're welcome, I am the voice of one calling in the desert, make straight the way for the Lord. What prophet was he quoting? When John says, I am the voice of one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord, what prophet was he quoting? Isaiah is correct. All right. And a dum-dum. All right. Good job for those. Thank you, Dave. Couple of announcements to give. First and foremost, update on Marvin. He is recovering steadily, and he is looking forward to soon being able to sleep in his own bed instead of his recliner. And so that kind of gives you the understanding of where he's at and where we're hoping him to be, okay? So pray for Marvin and for Linda, and if you want to be a blessing to them during this time, that would be appreciated. Definitely be a blessing to them if you can. So that is the update on Marvin and Linda, and an update on Vinny. And this is from, I'm going to read you Gary Talkenbaugh's update, because I don't know if we have anything afterwards, but this was Friday or Saturday? Yesterday? Okay. He is improving, but not out of the woods yet. Numbers have to continue to improve, and then he will be discharged Monday to rest at home for 2 weeks if he continues to improve. After the 2 weeks, he'll have to go to Apple Hill for another test, and he may have to get something done with his bone marrow if the test is not favorable. If his numbers are not good Monday, he will not be able to go home and have to get the bone marrow thing done on Monday. So that is the latest update from Gary, unless somebody else has a follow-up on that.
He slept 12 hours last night, the first he slept since he's been there. So he said he was feeling very good this morning, and looking forward to what the day had to bring. But he was,
Good.
his body obviously needed the rest.
Good. Vinny is a missionary in that hospital, okay? Gary?
He prayed, a nurse came in to do his blood, and he ended up praying for him.
Good.
So he's already working on converting the hospital. So
By as much trial and tribulation our church has had this year, I think all of York Hospital is going to be converted, okay? So between Rich, Vinny, and everybody else that are out there, right? So that nurse's name is Hannah if you wish to pray for her. There's also other people such as Mike and others who have been ministered by Vinny. And he did tell me, Vinny told me this morning to thank the family for prayers. Doctors are making good headway to helping him. He's feeling much better. He wishes he could be there. He wants to thank you all for your visits, for your love, for your kindness. If you can be a blessing to Vinny, you can be a blessing to him by visiting him in the hospital, praying for him here, sending love to Kathy and to all of the children and grandchildren, right? And then also sending him emails. He gets those emails. He prints them out and has all the nurses read them to him. So it's just a way for him to minister even more and for us to minister to him likewise. So that is an update on Vinny, and we are praying for him. For those of you who don't know, and there's probably a good majority here who don't, Taylor Heaton's brother-in-law was hit by a truck on Monday. This is his sister's husband, and they have three children. And for a while on Monday, it happened Monday afternoon after work. For a while, it did not look good. I mean, there was some definite there was a definite fight for his life on Monday evening, and he had collapsed lungs, broken ribs, broken arms, bleeding internally, and go down the list, everything that you can expect for when you get hit by a truck. I was able to visit with him on Monday evening. Obviously, he wasn't conscious. I was able to talk to Taylor's sister, Bree, pray with the family that was there that evening. And then I was able to visit him on Wednesday and on Friday. When I'd go up to visit Vinny, I'd go up there and visit Derek and Vinny. And I tried to go to Derek first so I can give Vinny an update, because Vinny's in there praying for Derek now. So it's kind of fun to go in there and have that visit. Well, on the last time I was there on Friday, Derek had made some significant progress. He was awake. He had surgery on his arm. They brought him in breakfast, which means that he was going to be able to eat. And there's probably even more updates since Friday. I just haven't yet got a update since Friday. Okay, so pray for Derek Myers and his wife, Bree. Bree is Taylor's sister, and their three children and the extended family at large. And for those of you involved in the Benevolent Fund ministry, I would like to have a discussion with you pertaining that particular situation, as there will be a lot of incurred cost, even in simple things such as food for the home during this time, as they've been door dashing nonstop for their three children. As of Friday, none of the kids have been able to see mom or dad yet. So just pray for that situation. His name is Derek Myers, okay? And we'll keep you updated as best we can pertaining that family. Okay, so those were some of the updates on health that I wanted to bring out. And I want to welcome a couple of people. Obviously, you have Eli back there, Mr. Wright's son. Always good to see him. And then actually a former classmate of Jeff's, right? Weren't you guys in the same grade or close? One under. And Robert and Indy Leak, I saw them earlier right here, and they're also classmates as well, and they're good friends with the Wright families, coming down here and visit. He actually has family in Westminster, Maryland. Is that correct? Westminster, Maryland. So it's actually good to see them here. And Indy, I'm telling you, I've learned a lesson. They grow up. All right? They grow up. You see these kids 10 years ago, and now they're adults. And I'm like, whoa. Last thing I used to do was, poke them, tickle them, or whatever, back when they were little kids. And now here they are, married or grown. Eli's going to be a senior this year at West Point. So there's kind of a lot of things happening in that world. So it's good to have you guys here and with us today. Big update now on Kayla. And I want to introduce to you her newest update. For those of you, it's been some time since you've heard about her ministry. But she, for those of you who don't know, her ministry is Hope Voyage Ministries, where she wants to be able to use her outdoor degree and sailing expertise for the cause of the gospel, be a missionary in many different ways. In order for her to do that, she's got to be able to get her sailing license and progress in that. And I think you're at, how many days left on that? 81 days out of 365 days. 81 days, for those of you not familiar, a day consists of 4 hours out on the sea. And you can't do 2 days in one. You can't just go sailing for 8 hours and get 2 days. So you have to do 81 days of at least 4 hours out on the sea. And she has 81 days left. Recently, about a year ago or so, she was donated a boat. And that was a huge blessing. And probably not even a year ago. It's probably less than a year ago, but nonetheless, it was about a year or so. She was donated a boat, and they've graciously have held that boat in North Carolina for her. They're going to give it to her, technically for the sale of $1, since they can't donate it, so they're selling it for $1. And then she has been doing all of her due diligence to be able to get that boat from North Carolina up to here. And the first thing that she had to do was find a docking station for it. Through some of the network that God provided, she had found a docking space for free. It was going to be near the Baltimore Bridge. It was a private dock, and that procurement initiated the whole plan to go get the boat. And so everything began to get into motion. She began to find the help that she needed to get this boat. And then 2 weeks before she was to leave here to go get the boat and sail it up here, the dock was rescinded, and she was no longer able to use that dock. And I remember she told that to us, and it was like, your stomach falls out. You're like, no, what's going to happen? Well, within a matter of, I think, 24 hours. Okay. Yeah, after praying feverishly for that 24 hours, actually a friend of Gary Sutton Kayla had known through the mutual connection there, and Frank McKee was able to donate Kayla an actual spot in the Baltimore Yacht Club in Baltimore area, which is a significant improvement from where she was going to be at anyway. And so everything is back onto the table, and she's able to leave. And so coming up on July 15th, Lydia Burks, one of our co-workers, a Christian young lady, is going to be going down with Kayla. They're going to be down there for about a week to prep the boat. They're going to plot their route out. They're going to get trained by the people who are donating the boat on the specific uses of the vessels and some things like that. And then the following week, Carter and Tegan, Kayla's niece and nephew, now young adults themselves, will be her crewmates. And for 1 week, she will be sailing on the mighty oceans, okay, and bringing it all the way down from North Carolina up to the Baltimore Yacht Club. And so that is obviously a large undertaking. And pray for Kayla. There's a lot of prayer requests to pray for. Pray for good weather during that week that she has. Pray for wind, right, as it's a sailboat, right? So pray for wind and enough wind. Pray for health and safety, okay? She is not going to be on a cruise like Teresa was, okay? She will be her own crew, okay, for the sail. And pray also that Kairos, that's the name of her boat, Kairos will make it to Baltimore without any kind of maintenance issues or any kind of large surprise. And also on the spiritual side of things, pray that God will be able to use that time, with her niece and her nephew, in her own life, but also pray that she'll begin to once she gets that boat up here, begin to use that boat for the Lord, even in her training years, as she's going to be getting these 81 days in. Frank McKee and many, many other people in that Baltimore Yacht Club. We not only have missionaries in York Hospital, but we will now have a missionary in the Baltimore Yacht Club, okay? And so pray for that. And Kayla, do you have anything else you want to add to that update at all?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Generally pray.
So July the 15th, she will be leaving here, July 15th, and then she will be starting her sail, Lord willing, July the 20th, and hopefully back here by...
At least within the area, like around the 26th or so. I should be here that following Sunday, because I have to work the next day, so I need to be here.
Okay, so for about 2 weeks. 1 week driving down and prepping and learning, and basically 1 week of actual sailing and bringing it up here, okay? So keep her in your prayers, and if you can be a blessing to her during that time, please do so. She should have cell phone and all of that stuff most of the time, if you wanted to chime in and see how she's doing. Okay? All right, with that, let's sing another song. Song number 479, Onward, Christian Soldiers. And then afterwards, we'll do our business meeting as we discussed last week.
Again, if you can stand, please do so. If not, yeah, stand in your heart.
Christ the royal master. Yeah? Okay, come on.
Good morning. Good. How are you?
Yeah, you are in the nurse.
Switching over to go back to the lab.
I've done that for you.
Go to the hospital before you go.
And it's like,
Must be a very good job.
They keep calling and asking you.
Yeah, we just went just for we were gonna go Saturday. Just spend the day.
Donuts and donuts. Yeah, that's probably not super. I have
There is a schedule. Passenger bags, I could look at my truck a little bit. To the same percentage of what you can have. Now, I don't appreciate
department where Justin is.
Very good. I know that is a difficult time. It's not easy. It's physically difficult.
I want to preach a message entitled The Call to Help. It is strategic message because I do want to begin to launch some ministries into our community, and these ministries largely depend on the people of the church. And I want you to pray throughout this message and throughout this week because it goes hand in hand with the vote. And that is, what will you do? How will you help? Acts chapter number 16. For those of you unaware, Luke is the author of both the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts in the New Testament, Acts of the Apostles. And these two books of the Bible are the two longest books in the New Testament, respectively. Luke wrote more of the New Testament than any other author, including the Apostle Paul. And it's interesting to note that Luke was the only non-Jewish author of the New Testament. He was a Greek. However, Luke never names himself in any of his books, and he is only mentioned by name 3 times in the entire Bible. The reason why we think of him so much is because his name is one of the Gospels, and therefore we think Luke is all throughout. But truth be told, he's only mentioned by name 3 times. Luke was a Gentile, a very learned Gentile at that. Colossians chapter number 4 and verse 14 reveals that Luke was a physician. And so for this morning's message, I want to refer to Luke as Dr. Luke. Dr. Luke was most probably from the city of Antioch in Syria, as early church historians point out. And even though Dr. Luke was a humble man, he had some local pride, if you will, about him when it came to his city of Antioch. He mentions that city numerous times in the book of Acts. And out of the 7 men chosen in Acts chapter number 6, Luke mentions only one of their hometowns. Nicholas was from Antioch. I'm not sure if Antioch had a high school football team or not during his era, but if there was, Luke undoubtedly would have probably worn a jersey to every one of those games. It appears, if you study the Bible, that Dr. Luke really enjoyed his career as a physician. After all, he's the only gospel writer to mention any of Jesus' statements regarding physicians. How many of you have heard people say the great physician before referring to Jesus? Luke is the only one who kind of highlights the medical statements of Jesus. And there was a major medical center in Tarsus among other places in the region, and it is quite possible that Saul, now the Apostle Paul, and Dr. Luke were both educated in the same school of Tarsus. Being that the Apostle Paul calls Dr. Luke the beloved physician, it appears that Dr. Luke was of the Hippocratic school of thought as opposed to the Platonic view. In other words, Dr. Luke was most probably a family doctor and not an employee of the state. If you look in Acts chapter number 21 and verse number 1, Dr. Luke mentions the island of Chios, which was the homeland of Hippocrates, which no doubt must have been a highlight for Dr. Luke because he revered Hippocrates as the father of modern medicine. And to this day, those of you involved in healthcare still take the Hippocratic oath. Dr. Luke, as you now see, was a highly educated and practicing professional in his day. He worked as a doctor. He spoke as a doctor. He wrote as a doctor. But because Dr. Luke never mentioned himself in his books, we don't know if his signature was legible or not, as the art of scribbling is a rather new phenomenon. No one is for sure when Dr. Luke was converted to Christianity. It seems as though he was already a Christian before the missionary journeys of the Apostle Paul even began. However, this passage here in Acts chapter number 16 is the very first encounter that we see of Dr. Luke and the Apostle Paul together. And perhaps the Apostle Paul had summoned Dr. Luke as his personal physician for many of his ailments, because the Apostle Paul was no foreigner to pain, to disease, to distress. If you look at 2 Corinthians chapter number 11, verses 23 through 28, it describes many of Paul's physical problems that he had to deal with. In fact, it mentions that on one occasion, the apostle spent an entire day and night bobbing up and down in the waters of the Mediterranean, trying not to drown. Just prior to the apostle Paul's execution in Rome, Paul relives the persecution that he suffered in the city of Lystra in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse number 11, where it says this: persecutions, afflictions which came unto me at Antioch, at Iconium, at Lystra. What persecutions I endured, but out of them all the Lord delivered me. Of course, he had just left Lystra, and on this occasion, it does not record any persecution on this particular visit, but perhaps Paul was anticipating it. Nonetheless, Dr. Luke was accustomed to helping people heal, and so he shows up inconspicuously at Troas, and he meets up with the Apostle Paul and his missionary team in Acts chapter number 16. It's at this point in the narrative of what we commonly call the Macedonian call. This is where we have arrived. We know he was a working professional doctor. We know that he must have been converted to Christianity. We know the Apostle Paul must have had good use for Dr. Luke to join him. And so we meet Dr. Luke for the very first time here in Acts chapter number 16. For the Apostle Paul, it was his second missionary journey. He had just visited the churches in the cities of Derbe and Lystra and Iconium on the Asia Minor side, and along the way, Timothy, his son in the faith, joins with the Apostle Paul and with Silas, and together this trio of men meet up with Dr. Luke in the city of Troas, home of the Roman Trojans. It was here at Troas where the Apostle Paul receives a vision to go to the region of Macedonia, and there is something in that vision that he sees that Acts chapter number 16 describes that compels Dr. Luke to tag along and become the fourth member of the missionary team. And Dr. Luke sets aside his practice. Dr. Luke sets aside his profession, sets aside his degrees, sets aside his finances, and became a missionary right there in Acts chapter number 16. And we know this because of his use of pronouns in Acts chapter number 16. Dr. Luke was writing about those missionaries and their journeys in verses 6, 7, and 8, where he uses the pronoun they. Look at verse number 6 of Acts chapter number 16. It says, "Now when they had gone throughout Phrygia and the region of Galatia, and were forbidden of the Holy Ghost to preach the word in Asia, after they were come to Mysia, they essayed to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit suffered them not. And they, passing by Mysia, came down to Troas." And Dr. Luke was not a part of the team in that section. He was writing about them, their journeys, and their missionary efforts. But in verse number 9, something drastic and life-changing happens, because all of a sudden in verse number 10, Dr. Luke switches his use of pronouns from they to we. Verse 10 says, after he had seen the vision, immediately we endeavored to go into Macedonia, assuredly gathering that the Lord had called us for to preach the gospel unto them. You see, it was no longer about those missionaries and their work like it was in verse 8. It was about we missionaries and our work in verse number 10. Plainly put, Dr. Luke had joined the team. So what is it about Acts chapter number 16 and verse number 9 that made Dr. Luke join the missionary team? What is it about Acts chapter 16 and verse number 9 that compelled a highly educated man with no ministry experience and no formal ministerial education to go and leave his doctor profession and serve in the ministry that involved persecution? What is it about Acts chapter number 16 and verse number 9 that has compelled many people from that day until today to leave all that they own, to leave all that they know, to serve the Lord? What is it about Acts chapter 16 and verse number 9 that compels people to go to Muslim countries like the Krigo family that we heard not too long ago? What is it about Acts chapter 16 and verse number 9 that lets people leave and forsake their mother and their fathers and to go into a foreign mission field? What is it about Acts chapter number 16 and verse number 9 that compelled a man by the name of John Leonard Dober to sell himself as a slave that he might be a missionary to slaves in the Caribbean? What is it about Acts chapter 16 and verse number 9 that compels William Borden to leave his inheritance of millions of dollars that he might go to China to preach the gospel? Let's read Acts chapter 16 and verse number 9. The Bible says, and a vision appeared to Paul in the night. There stood a man of Macedonia and prayed him, saying, come over into Macedonia and help us. I think the answer is pretty simple as to what compelled Dr. Luke to join the team. There was a call to help. Obviously, this call to help was a sacred calling and specifically referred to the preaching of the gospel. But Dr. Luke didn't need all of the specifics and the job requirements at hand. He had worked in the emergency room floor before, and when he had heard the cry for help there, he immediately enlisted his services. Dr. Luke was no Apostle Paul when it came to preaching, but this morning I want us to look at Dr. Luke's ministry. I want you to examine 3 ways that Dr. Luke answered that call to help that we see in Acts 16 and verse number 9. And first, Dr. Luke answered that call to help by simply going. I'm not so sure if Dr. Luke knew exactly what he would be doing when he got to Macedonia. It didn't really matter to him. He set his sails to help. Over and over throughout the pages of Scripture, you will see the command to go. Go ye therefore and teach all nations. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. One man said the best ability is availability. Dr. Luke was an educated man, but not in theology. Dr. Luke already had himself a career, but not in ministry. Dr. Luke was used to having patients crying out for help, but not in this way. And I'm certain that Dr. Luke could have come up with a book entitled 1001 Reasons as to why he couldn't go and join the team to help the Apostle Paul preach the gospel, but he had heard the call to help, and immediately he went. And today, just like in that nursery, there's a call for help ringing out. And I want you to not only hear those little babies cry out, but I want us to hear the 44,000 people of York, Pennsylvania. I want us to hear the 443,000 people of York County, the 12.81 million people in the state of Pennsylvania, the 325 or more million people in the USA, the 741 million people of Europe, the 1.2 billion people in Africa, the 4.5 billion people of Asia, all crying out, come over and help us. What about all of Dr. Luke's schooling? What about all the finances that he would be giving up or the finances that he would need? What about his medical practice? What about his professional clients and his network and relationships that he had built up? What about that article that he published in the Troas Journal of Medicine? Jesus teaches us that all of that will take care of itself. Someone is crying out for help. And Dr. Luke didn't need to know exactly what he would be doing, or what hours he would be working, or what figures he would be paid, or he didn't need to know where his office would be located, or what kind of home he would be staying in. All that Dr. Luke knew was that he just needed to get there. If it was you, would you have gone? Over and over in the field of ministry, I am presented with countless times where I need to get there, and I have no idea what I'm going to do when I get there. Even this past week, when I was visiting Bree and Derek in ICU trauma on the 3rd floor of the North Towers in York Hospital at 10 o'clock in the evening, what do? But get there. And the Lord will allow you to minister when you get there as He sees fit. I'm speaking to the Dr. Lukes of this crowd. I'm speaking to those of you who are in the middle of their profession. This is not the children's sermon where I'm telling children, hey, if you can pick a career, will you serve the Lord? I'm speaking to those of you who are in the middle of your careers. Will you serve the Lord? I'm speaking to those of you with scheduled appointments for this coming week. I'm speaking to those who are already enjoying the years and the benefits of retirement. I'm speaking to every man, every lady, to myself as well. Are you willing to forsake all and follow Him? I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And Jesus Christ Himself said in Luke 14:33, likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. Is the Spirit of God moving in your heart, in your mind? Then let me challenge you to forsake all and follow Him. exchange your comforts for a cross. And in that great exchange, you'll find out that he exchanges your cross for a crown. Dr. Luke recorded in his gospel the words of Christ himself in Luke chapter 18. Verily I say unto you, there is no man that hath left house or parents or brethren or wife or children for the kingdom of God's sake, who shall not receive manifold more in this present time and in the world to come. Life everlasting. Dr. Luke answered that call to help by simply going. How about you? You don't need to be an Apostle Paul. You don't even have to be a Dr. Luke. You don't even have to be a Sean Ward. You just got to be who God wants you to be. And give him your all and serve him. Perhaps it's a ministry here in the local church. Perhaps it's a single one-time task that you need to do. Perhaps it is full-time Christian service where God is tugging at your heart to put your path towards direction of church planting or missions. Will you go? That's a big question in a few words. In 1904, William Borden, heir to the entire Borden Dairy estate, graduated from Chicago High School as a millionaire. His parents had given him a trip around the world before he was to engage in college and learn business development and then assume the inheritance of the Borden dynasty. While traveling around the world as a high school graduate, he traveled through Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, and it gave Borden a burden for the world's hurting people. Writing a letter back home, he said this, I quote, "I'm going to give my life to prepare for the mission field." When he made that decision, he took out his Bible and he wrote 2 words in the back of it, "No reserves." He turned down high-paying jobs after graduation from Yale University, and he entered 2 more words in his Bible as he was setting his sails to go after the Chinese Muslims. He wrote right underneath, "No reserves, no retreats." He completed his studies after Yale at Princeton Seminary, and then he boarded his ship to go to China, but he first needed to stop in Egypt so he could learn the Arabic language of which you heard Makbel singing earlier. While in Egypt, he was stricken with cerebral meningitis, and he died within 1 month. A waste, you say? Not in God's plan. In his Bible, underneath no reserves and no retreats, he had written the words, "No regrets." And though William Borden never was able to make his path all the way to China, he has inspired countless others of people to go and do what he was unable to accomplish. How did he do that? By simply going. Secondly, not only did Dr. Luke simply go, but he answered the call to help by simply serving. Dr. Luke was using his talents for the Lord. Turn, if you will, over to Acts chapter 28 for a brief moment. I want you to see an interesting thing that I saw when studying the career of Dr. Luke. Dr. Luke did not go everywhere with the Apostle Paul on his journeys, but we do see 3 instances in the book of Acts where Dr. Luke says we or us instead of they or them. Acts chapter number 16, verses 10 through 40. Acts chapter 20, verse 5 through 21, verse 18. And then Acts chapter number 27 and verse number 1 through Acts 28 and verse 14. So here in chapter 27, Dr. Luke again is traveling with the Apostle Paul on his way to Rome. And on their way, a huge storm named Euroclydon comes and shipwrecks their ship. God miraculously preserves their lives of all the individuals in this wreck, and they drifted ashore. The Bible describes the scene on all the floating pieces of wood. They get to an island full of barbarians. And it's here where God records something interesting for all of us to read. Look at verse number 7 of Acts chapter number 28. The Bible says, in the same quarters were possessions of the chief man of the island, whose name was Publius. There's a good baby name for those of you wondering. Publius, who received us and lodged us 3 days courteously. And it came to pass that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and of a bloody flux, to whom Paul entered in and prayed and laid his hands on him, and he healed him. So when this was done, others also which had diseases in the island came and were healed. Isn't that interesting? The Apostle Paul and Dr. Luke began a healing ministry. When you study this passage, though, in closer examination, you'll notice that behind the English word healed in verses 8 and verses 9, there are actually two different Greek words. Publius was healed. The Greek word is iaomahi, okay, which means to heal or to make whole. So in verse number 8, we see one Greek word, but in verse number 9, there's another word, healed, but that Greek word is actually therapou, which means to wait upon menially. That is, to relieve, to cure, to heal. We get the word therapy from that Greek word. It appears, when you study these two verses out, that the Apostle Paul goes into the father of Publius and miraculously heals him immediately and wholly in verse number 8. But then afterwards, in verse number 9, the Apostle Paul gives the ministry to Dr. Luke and says, hey, administer your therapy. Use your profession and help these people recover their health. And I couldn't help but be excited, because when Dr. Luke had left all to follow the Lord, he probably thought, there goes all of my training from the years in the past. But now the Lord is actually taking those years of training and employing his talents for him in his own way. Dr. Luke had given up his own practice with good pay and with full benefits, but now Dr. Luke was employed by the great physician with better pay and better benefits. Many people think that in order for you to serve the Lord or to be used by God, that you have to stand up in front of a bunch of people and do what I'm doing right now. You're not comfortable with public speaking. You're not comfortable with speaking in front of a lot of people. But many times, God's not asking you to always be the person up front. Sometimes he's asking you to just simply use the talents that you already have to serve him with. He doesn't call everyone to be pastors, though he does call some. He doesn't call all to be missionaries, though he does call some. But God is calling every one of us. Heaven has an ad out in the Christian newspaper that says, now hiring, looking for servants. God is looking for electricians to be Christian electricians, telling about Jesus being the light of the world. God is looking for architects to be Christian architects, laying out the blueprints of a godly home, of godly friendships, telling people that Jesus Christ is the cornerstone that you must build your life upon. God is looking for doctors like Dr. Luke, who will serve the great physician. He's looking for bakers who will serve the bread of life. He's looking for landscapers who will tend to the true vine. He's looking for jewelers who will serve the pearl of great price. For geologists who will explain Jesus Christ, the rock of ages. For plumbers to transport the living water to all of those who thirst. For farmers who will declare and toil for the Lord of the harvest. For bankers who will invest in the hidden treasures of Christ and reveal to people that the God's riches are the only riches that will last eternally. He's looking for newspaper delivery boys like I was back in my day, pedaling a bike, flinging the good news out to every person who will hear the gospel, good tidings of great joy. He's looking for managers and supervisors to be Christian managers and Christian supervisors. He's looking for teachers and professors who will teach the way, the logos, the truth, the life. He's looking for factory workers, hairstylists, delivery drivers, radio show hosts, and car salesmen, and retired police officers, and go down the list to serve him with your talents, and college students, and high school students, and West Point students, and grade school children. He's looking for us all to serve him. When I lived on Camp Street, my neighbor had gotten saved, Adam. And one day I went out door knocking on a Saturday, and I came back, and Adam, with his cut-off shirt and shorts, sweating from his brow, was just parking his lawnmower into his garage. And I looked out, and my lawn had gotten a fresh manicure. And I said, Adam, thanks, man. Adam came up to me, wiped his brow, and says, yeah, I know you go out there and do all that stuff for the Lord and stuff, preaching and all that all around, but I don't really do that kind of stuff, but I figure, you know what, while you do that, I can take care of your lawn. I said, Adam, God's going to bless you for that. God's going to bless you for that. God's simply looking, church, for you to yield to him what you already have, so that he can reveal himself to other people through you. He needs little lads with little lunches, beautiful ladies like Queen Esther, ruddy boys like David, skilled craftsmen, blue-collar tradesmen like Bezalel in the Old Testament, professionals, doctors, lawyers, accountants. What I'm trying to say is that God is looking to hire people like you. Will you go and help? Will you surrender? Will you be like that little donkey in the movie of Shrek? Pick me! Pick me! Will you be the one who will say, I can fill that role. I can stand in that gap. So many people will say, I don't have talents to give, but I have studied the scriptures, and I found that there's really only 5 talents that you need. They're found in 1 Corinthians chapter number 1 and verse number 27, where it says, God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and base things of the world, and things which are despised hath God chosen. Yea, things which are not, to bring to naught things that are. 5 talents that you need. Willie has all of them. Foolish, weak, base, despised, and things which are not. Foolish things, you say? Didn't God use a donkey? Weak things, you say? Didn't God use a widow? Base things? Didn't God use a small handful of flour and a small cruse of oil that just simply wouldn't run out? Wasn't it only 2 small fishes and 5 barley loaves? Wasn't it only 5 smooth stones and the Lord only needed 1 of those? Wasn't it just a little mustard seed of which he snatched from the ground to teach a great truth? Wasn't it just a rod in the hand of a man? Despised things? Wasn't it the jawbone of a donkey that sat rotting on the side of which Samson took? Wasn't it a dead body that stinketh, said his sisters? The favorite of mine is things which are not. In other words, God doesn't need anything. Ex nihilo, out of nothing, he creates it all. You say, why is that your favorite? Because sometimes I hear so many people say, I have nothing to give. Then give God your nothing and let him do something with it. But you have to be willing to go and to serve. That no flesh should glory in his presence. And last, Dr. Luke answered the call to help, but not only going and not only serving, but by simply staying. Dr. Luke was at the Apostle Paul's side and would do whatever the Apostle Paul needed. All of the great New Testament focus is really on people like Peter or Paul. But the Peters and the Pauls need Dr. Luke's. Dr. Luke would be there to help. Near the end of the Apostle Paul's life, he wrote in 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse number 10, he says, Demas hath forsaken me. Here he is in the prison of Rome, in a dungeon 2 stories down in the sewer system, writing these gospel words, Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world, and is departed unto Thessalonica, Crescens to Galatia, Titus unto Dalmatia, only Luke is with me. Those are powerful words. Only Luke is with me. Dr. Luke was there for the Apostle Paul in the apostle's darkest hour of life. I have watched as a pastor of this church, some of you who have been with people in the greatest hour of their need. I witnessed Rich never leave Rosie's side. I have seen this church rally in the early years around Willie and Danica when they needed people. I have seen hundreds of cases around the world of people that I know who have been there with them. I have watched and heard when Rich was in the hospital, Sean going to Rich's house and Gary going over to the hospital. And I've seen Dave over at Marvin's house weeding the gardens because people need people. That's why. And God has orchestrated for the church to be that. And sometimes when life gets hard, people leave when they should stay. And they should latch on the harder and say, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to leave. Only Luke is with me. And we have an example in the scriptures of that kind of friend, church. Proverbs 18, verse 24, there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. Christ knows what it's like to have all men forsake him. And that's why Jesus Christ says to us that he would never leave us and never forsake us. And that's all the promise that we need, truth be told. It sure is having It sure is a tremendous blessing having a friend on earth to help bear the pain and to share the joys that we all carry in this world. And the greatest joy that I have ever experienced in this life is to have my family and to have my friends, this church, be with me in moments of triumph and in moments of tragedy. The greatest blessings and the greatest memories of my life are with many of you people who have been there through thick and thin. I decided against illustrating this. I've done this in the past. But there was a clinical study done in the psychosomatic medicine that found that men had a higher pain threshold than ladies, particularly when it came to coldness. Ladies always seem to be bothered by the cold. As you witnessed, Dave has short sleeves on, Mary has a sweater on. To study this out a little bit, they came up with a large pot of iced water, and the men were to put their hand into that ice water. And when you do that, it is numbing cold. And they found something interesting in that study. These men were paid for the length of time that they had their hands submerged into ice water. They found this. They found that when a man was in the room alone, he only kept his hand in the water a certain time. But if somebody else was in the room with him, that time that he held his hand in the water doubled. That was the study. And perhaps it's some hormonal thing where men are going to prove I can keep my hand in the water longer than you. But they found that if somebody was in the room with them, they could tolerate the pain 50% longer than if somebody wasn't with them. Could it be, as I close, could it be that the Apostle Paul finished his course and kept the faith because Dr. Luke was with him? Could it be that the Apostle Paul didn't recant his faith simply because Dr. Luke was at the top of that dungeon hole? Apostle Paul, you down there? Hey, you need me to do anything for you today? Let me ask you this question. What person, right now, what person are you standing next to? Who are you there for? I'm assuming that probably everybody in this room has felt betrayal. And you know what that feels like. Who are you there for? It didn't really matter if he was a founding member of the team. He was the closing member. It didn't matter when he started. It didn't matter how he finished. Dr. Luke had resolved to stay to the end. Only Luke is with me. He was a tremendous help to the Apostle Paul by simply going, simply serving, and simply staying. My favorite quote is from Jim Elliot, who says, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Are you willing to go, to serve, and to stay? Let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father,